Well, thanks for joining us, Mike.
Wow, so happy to be here.
Yeah, so for the listeners, we're doing kind of a fun experiment. We're actually going on YouTube with the video. So we're videoing this. So if you want to see what we look like in person, check out Byrnes Consulting's YouTube channel and you can see us actually doing this live.
Yeah, it's great. Actually, because of the FPA Coaches Corner thing, we got connected to do the podcast, and I happen to be speaking in Dallas today. So that's why we have the benefit of doing it together.
So trying out all these new media forms. So I'm sure we're going to dive into that in a little bit. But I love that you're part of the coaches program and you're providing a lot of content on business growth strategies. So what advice do you have on our listeners on that huge, broad topic of business growth strategies?
Well, it's too big, as you know. Hannah had to suffer through seeing me present today. So I'm sorry you got me twice in one day. But today we focus just on client referrals. That's one main way. The other way is strategic alliances. It's really nice to have a great alliance that gives you a steady stream of leads year after year after year. The other thing is, any kind of lead that is marketing or sales related, but there's no referral. Those are organic growth. And then the fourth one, I always call it the fist of growth, but that's mergers and acquisitions. So tucking in somebody or acquiring a firm and buying just the book. And then the fifth one is just a slush of a whole bunch of other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what I like kind of about what you're talking about, because, this podcast is for newer planners. And so there definitely are firm owners, but there's also a lot of people that work for somebody else. And a lot of these skills apply to everybody. Mm-hmm. I mean, you talked about building a solid centers of influence. Like if you're in your 20s and you're building a solid centers of influence, I mean, that's going to stay with you regardless of what you do for your career. So can you talk a little bit about how do you build those centers of influence relationships? Great.
And so not to be nitpicky, but I call them strategic alliances because I really want to reinforce that it's like a partnership, even though they don't officially have an agreement. Maybe they do, but most of them don't. But they really work to help each other's businesses. A center of influence could just be someone that just throws leads at you and there's no two-way relationship. So I'm rambling a little bit, but the reason that I'm trying to say that is if they invest in the right relationships and just say let's say $1 million in AUM leads a year times 10 years or 15, that's huge. When we talk to firms that are really, really big and ask them how do they get so successful, a lot of times strategic alliances is it. Can I tell you a little bit more about it?
Oh, please do.
So the big fault that we see in the industry is that it's diversification, which is advisors get that. And so they try to diversify. I'm going to give the leads to whoever gives me the most leads. Now imagine just one type, like a CPA. If you have 10 CPAs that you're working with, guess what? They maybe have 10 advisors. And it takes a lot of time to work those relationships. And they're always like competitor situations. And it's like dating 12 people or 10 people. It doesn't work, So the real strong relationships are the one-on-one. That's a little different if you're a $1 billion firm plus and you have multiple teams, but each advisor can kind of have their own relationship. But most of the time it should be firm to firm.
And how long do centers of influence relationships usually take before they get to that point where you're getting a lot of good referrals?
That is great, Greston. Literally, I always give the analogy, you don't get married on the first date, or rarely do you do that. So they do take a little time to, set the foundation. And I use the analogy of like plants, like you need to put the seeds down and then give them some attention. But when they grow, that's where you want to spend a lot of time maintaining them too, so that they grow stronger and stronger and stronger. We oftentimes see that the relationships just fizzle out because the person didn't invest enough time to keep them going. One other thing I will say, before we switch topics too, is that advisors or financial planners can be really creative. There's an amazing amount. There's over 100, probably thousands of lead sources out there where you can create an alliance. It doesn't have to be the traditional accountant and attorney. It could be, I think we talked a little on the ride over here about how charities can be a lead source.
Yeah. Well, and, I love this idea of building relationships. I mean, because at the end of the day, it's a human-to-human relationship that you're building with whoever that person may be. I know locally, we're in Dallas, or I'm in Dallas, they have next-gen events that are actually partnered with the Young CPA Society and Young Attorneys Society. And so that's a great way to meet other young planners or young attorneys or young centers of influence who might not be able to give you the business now, but in 20 years, hopefully you both are more established in your firm.
Right. And a younger person that's newer, or even a person that's come into the industry, One of the ways to exchange and make the relationships really work is you scratch my back, I scratch yours. But the challenge for someone brand new to the industry is they don't have that. Like they can't give a lot of leads. One really good recommendation I have is to go out there and get press, like build up your own credibility so you carry more weight. So maybe they want to, you're a future rock star, you're already there, you have your own podcast show. Like they would maybe want to work with you more than a regular planner. But then take it even one more step and interview them for your piece. If you're doing a video or an article, and get them the press. And what happens is they really are excited because a lot of, like, for example, a CPA firm, they're really bad at marketing traditionally. So you're already doing something that they don't have. They're really appreciative. So they're actually going to reward you even though they're not getting leads. And the other interesting thing too is once you have great press and you interview them or you have them on your podcast or you have them in your article or whatever it is, not only are you sharing it with your audience, whether it's your clients, prospects, etc., but they're doing it too. So your stuff gets twice as many eyeballs.
That's such a good point. I've seen a couple firms actually local who've done that really well, where they bring on their CPA or attorney and go to your YouTube channel. You can see what we're doing right now. They do something very similar and they post that on their blog. So they're getting a piece of content for their blog. And that's so, I mean, it's a young person in their firm who's doing it. Yeah. And so that's a really great, I need to steal that idea.
Well, the being creative too, whatever's in the moment, you might think of a strategic alliance that just because of the news idea. What's the hot topic that, for example, IRS tax scams are going on now? Maybe that was a cool thing you could have interviewed a CPA for. But the rental season is coming or ending. That could be going out to a commercial real estate or even a real estate person that's residential. And then there's kind of a seasonality of all these creative things you can do for content. Or you can just kind of have generic evergreen content that goes on forever and you can do it whenever you want.
Oh, that's great. So we listened, I just was at your presentation, proven ways to get client referrals. And so I had a couple of questions after that. So we won't make you rehearse your whole presentation, but I really liked it. But one of the things that you were talking about, how people make a mistake in asking for referrals. So specifically, you were saying basically advisors make it all about them. Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, just the term asking for referrals really means help me. And it is a sales approach. And the person that is on the other side, I said it in the presentation today, they feel like they're painted in a corner because they're there to hire you for your services. They're not there to be your sales force. So I don't know if you remember, but I offered better advice is to tap into why you're in the industry. And that is one, to make money. And so that's kind of the first part of asking referrals. But the second part is, you're a nice person. You like to help people. And that is a much easier conversation to have. So I don't know if you remember, but the wording could be totally different. Rather than say, can you help me grow my business? I really count on you to grow my business, which puts all the pressure on them. You can say, I would love to help people like you going through the same situation. And we gave a better example than that today. But the reality is you start to offer assistance to help their contacts. So their family members, their friends, their coworkers, whoever it is. And by offering to assist them, you're actually helping your client who's sitting across from you because you're giving them a benefit.
Well, and so many people, especially young planners, are like, that's why we came into the business, is to help people. And they're so turned off by the idea of sales because it just feels like you're saying that painting in the corner. Like I think we all kind of intuitively get that. But I love what you're saying because it's not just on sales. It's just a whole different way to approach your client where everything is about the client, even getting new business. It's still about how do I help the client or help their friends. So I love that mindset shift that you were really advocating in that.
Well, I will say the word sales is like a bad 4-letter word. People hate it. But, Charlie, who's not on the camera, he's our tech expert behind the scenes, is your husband. And if you have a debate on where to go to a movie this weekend, I don't know if you care or if you even go to movies, but that's sales. Like you have to, when you're working with somebody and you're trying to convince them to do something, sales is all throughout our lives. So when people just say, I'm not a salesperson, I'm like, you have to be to a certain extent. It's just a part of being a human.
Right. And it's are you authentically showing up in those places versus the slimy salesman, which none of us really want to be.
Right.
I hope.
And the poor used car salesman mentality where they're just, You know, and I think that's a nice approach too, is if you're more, there's a term called solution selling. If you're really helping people and trying to help them, it doesn't feel like you're pushing your own agenda. Yeah. You're going to be better at it. And if you tap into that helping people, you'll be more successful at whatever you do. Mm-hmm. So, can I ask you a couple questions? We were going to do this because we're going to do the video for the Coaches Corner video too. So this is so exciting having a podcast.
Yes.
Tell us, how did you get started and why do you do it?
Yeah. So I got started, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I was in the process of buying a practice, and my local FPA, my Dallas-Fort Worth FPA chapter, had a seminar series called You're a Financial Planner, Now What? Uh-huh. And it felt like a lifeline. It was where I learned about financial planning, what it was. It was where I could talk about financial planning. It was really where like I saw financial planning in practice. And so a couple of years after that, Patrick Daugherty and Trudy Turner decided to retire, and I was like, "You can't leave. This can't stop." And so they're like, we're retiring. Would you like to take over? And so I did with Lynn McIntyre. And so Charlie, who, if you listen to the podcast, you know Charlie's voice. His background is media and doing all this. And so he was always like, why don't you just throw it on the internet? Just see what happens. And so we started doing that, and he would edit them and throw them on the internet. And I was like, well, heck, I got some interesting people I'd love to get, start. And so that's just kind of how it started. And it just really built off of that.
So your advice is you have to marry a tech genius?
Pretty much. You got to marry well. That's a secret to all of it.
So you started it and maybe share some of the lessons you learned early on? Yeah.
So some of it was you just do it, and put the work in. I mean, there were several times where I was like, oh, is this even worth it? Like, you don't see the end. Mm-hmm. I remember when we got to the point where we got like our first 100 downloads, and I was like, 100 people have listened to us? Like, that's crazy. Uh-huh. And that was like over a couple episodes. And then I remember when we got our first 100 people listened to an episode, I'm like, 100 people? Like, that's it just doesn't resonate. Like, I feel like you can see my setup here if you're on the YouTube channel. Here's my mic that I use. But, so much of it is I'm sitting at my desk at my home office, and it's just me. I have a tree outside, and it just feels so small what I do. Mm. But at the same time, technology has allowed us to have this big impact. Yeah. And so I think that's what I've learned, is that consistency, even like the, episode, and you're in the 20s, or, we're in the teens and the 20s and the 30s, you're just kind of like, do people hear? And then people start reaching out, and then you're like, oh, wow, like there's actually a person on the other side of that number. Mm-hmm. So you think of, we talked about 100 downloads an episode. I mean, imagine having a room full of 100 advisors, or 100 people that you're talking to. Those are 100 people that you're speaking to. I mean, I'd be thrilled to get 100 people in a room. And so I don't know, I've kind of learned that compounding interest, if you would, online.
Yeah. Before I forget, and this will be a great time, in the after effect in the video, if people are watching the video, how would they find out where to find the podcast? Yeah, so we'll hopefully put this in the video. Uh-huh. It's You're a Financial Planner, Now What? So you can go to iTunes, you can go to Stitcher, whatever your favorite podcast player is. Mm-hmm. Search for that. You can search for my name, that'll be there too. And you can just subscribe there. Or we've actually partnered up since then with FPA. So you can go to fpaactivate.org and find all the podcasts and all the show notes and all the links to everything we talk about there. Yeah, cool. And hopefully this is good enough that they'll blast this out to all the members. Yeah, but absolutely. So back on the podcast, is it help your business at all, or is it just to help the planners, or what's your strategy? So strategy is an interesting word. So my plan originally was just to help new planners. Mm-hmm. It was a way to give back. I had bought 2 practices. I had left my broker-dealer. I had started my RIA. So I had some time on my hands. Mm-hmm. Just being honest, to do it. And it was just like, there's such a need for new planners. And it was like, I wasn't seeing what I thought needed to be out there. So you just do it. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how it got started. How it's helped my business, I don't know that I would say that I've gotten any clients from it. I have gotten recognition in the industry. So, Investment News 40 Under 40, Young Advisor to Watch. I've built up a resume that I think gives clients, gives more credibility to clients. Right. So I remember I had just switched my broker-dealer. I switched a broker-dealer to an RIA. I'm in my 20s, late 20s at this point, when I did that. And
clients came with me, but you could kind of sense there was like, is she real? Like, is she legitimate? And I remember the first, like, it was D Magazine here in Dallas, which is again through my local FPA chapter is how I got that. And when that email was sent out, it was just a different, like my clients could tell I could tell there was a difference with my clients. My clients were like, okay, she's legitimate. Like, okay, we can trust her. So that's kind of how I've seen it, like inadvertently.
Well, and to be honest, if you ever expand this, I know you have some news coming up. I don't know if you want to share that on the video, but do you want it or no?
Oh, we could, yeah.
She's having a baby.
Yeah, August, we're expecting a baby.
So you might not have time for the second idea of the podcast, but eventually you might want to go for more of the investor audience and expand it. But if you do, or if other people are thinking about getting into a podcast, how can that help them grow, and does it give them a competitive advantage? So you talked a little bit about it, but can you expand a little bit more?
Yeah, I think so. Like, what's crazy to me about doing this podcast is people feel like they know me. And like, I've had people come up to me and I'm like, oh my gosh, that part of my story. Like, that's it's so cool. Like, that's what videos does. That's what audio does. And like, that's the name of the game now, right? Like it's how do they know me? I mean, one of the things you mentioned in your presentation was, I can't remember how you said it, but it was something about like the humans, like
humans want to work with humans.
Yeah. Humans want to work with humans. And so I know, like, when I write blogs, sometimes it can sound a little corporate, or, I try not to do that, but hearing my voice, hearing my story, hearing my perspective, it's showing the clients what it's going to be like to work with me. So, they say, like, you want to eliminate surprises, right? Like, you want them to know what that's like. And so they know what meetings are going to be like with me because they know kind of how I talk. They know what I have to say. They kind of can buy into my philosophy before they get there. And I think it's just like any form of content, it's not blog posts, it's not video, it's just a podcast.
But I will say that advisors are starting to get that I always say they're in the publishing business because you now have a website and you have social media sites, so you can be a publisher. You don't have to go through traditional press. But they're better at the text piece. They're terrible at the podcasts and the videos. If they do videos, it's like the standard welcome video.
Well, and that's what's so great about podcasts. It's 10 times easier for me to talk into a microphone than it is for me to write a blog.
And what about videos? So we talked about it today and I always say enemy is the enemy of marketing is perfection.
Yep.
But when it comes to videos, people hate the way they sound and look. Like, look at that goofy guy. They're talking.
My hair
you look
is
great.
not, like,
you definitely make me look bad. But the reality is that they just want it to be perfect. And what they have to learn is some video is better than others. We could bore the listeners and the viewers with statistics about videos, but just trust me that if you do some searches on YouTube and find out what the viewership is and podcast too, it's booming and it's not going to slow down. It's going to only continue to increase.
So I started noticing this trend maybe a year ago, maybe more. But so I look at, like, where do my clients get their news from, right? So a lot of my clients read the Wall Street Journal. A lot of my clients, like, they subscribe to national news lines in New York Times, things like that. Because I know this because they send me those articles. The questions they ask are rooted in that. And so I'm subscribed to those same places because if a client asks a question, I better be able to read the article. But what I've started noticing is on most of those, like, big pieces that they do, it's not just one form of media. There's a second form of media on there. So it's not just the blog post, or it's not just their article. They have the reporter talking about it, or they have a video that summarizes what it's saying. And I was like, oh, that's a really interesting idea of how do you build out multiple forms of media on every page, and you reach a different audience, and you can take something stale, not stale. You can take the written words and make them come alive.
I saw it's kind of a non-related statistic. I forget the exact number, but an amazing amount of people watch videos online without sound. And so it kind of shows that you need both. And because they're in a work setting or they can't have the noise for some reason. So you can't just have video, or you can't, podcast is tough to have the words over it.
Right.
But the reality is if you can have a video or a podcast embedded on your website with the text that goes with it, or vice versa. And it shouldn't be a transcript. I don't think it should be apples to apples because it's kind of boring, but complementary.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's just so much. I mean, like, you just take, I've done this on a couple of my posts where I do have that two forms of media, like on my Guiding Wealth website. But you can just literally just take the bullet points, your outline for your blog, and then just talk through it.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have a different inflection. You're going to have a different take. It's not going to be as cleanly edited. But sometimes like it's kind of cool to hear somebody not stumble through it, but the human side of it.
Well, two things. We have this really impressive notes here. Here's our bullet points, and she can show you.
I got my notebook here.
If you're on the podcast, it's not impressive, just like a sticky. But if you type that up and you prepare, the videos and the podcasts are that much better because you put a little effort in. And like you said, then you have the idea of how to summarize it later. So what I found, not just your website, but YouTube is a search engine. So you should have all the text bullet points that the YouTube search engine and Google too can go and index these things to help them come up.
Well, and I love that. And I love this, like we're talking about new planners, right? So people who are newer to the business, this is a skill set. Like we've started in our FPA Activate group, I'm going live every week on Facebook Live. I was terrified. Like I still kind of am of doing those, but I'm getting so much more used to it. So now instead of running through it like 3 or 4 times before I go live, I can just go live.
Nice.
And so that's really, and again, a lot of this is just me getting over myself. But it's a skill set that you build and that you get better over time. So even if you're at a firm that you're like, I don't really want to help them with their marketing, or you're just playing around, if you develop that skill set, that's a marketable skill set that you're going to be able to fine tune. And what I'm realizing is a lot of advisors, like I've asked some people to do Facebook Lives for me in there, and people are afraid of it. And it's like, wow, okay, so I've gotten over that fear. So now I'm comfortable going live. So that opens up a lot more opportunities. And I don't know, I just really like this idea of building out these media sources it's me building a skill in myself. That could be in a very different form 5 years from now.
I want to pat her on the back here. So the reason that it's really such a competitive advantage is one, just personality-wise and talent-wise, you have it, which is great. But there are some channels advisors aren't allowed to do these types of things. And they can't go live. Everything has to be a pre-written script. Sorry if you're in the FINRA world, which you luckily,
I'm not.
We don't want to talk about compliance and get anybody in trouble, but the people that read the scripts, even if they have really good teleprompters, so it doesn't even look like they're looking in the camera, but the teleprompter's right there, you can tell. Yeah.
Well, there's a reason why newscasters go to school for it, and like it's an actual developed skill on how to read it. So there are some classes out there to help you with the teleprompter side of it. But
it wouldn't help me. I'm like, that guy can't read.
Man, we've done some teleprompter videos, and I'll tell you, it is hard. It is not as easy as you like to think it is.
And my eyes are going too. They'd have to have a font so big. I would read it so slow. Yeah. I'd read it so slow that like one word at a time.
I was looking at there's a college student in New York. He does Instagram, and he's a college student, and he just is giving tips for his friends. And I'm like, wow, like what a competitive advantage when he's looking for a job. Like his employers are going to be able to go through and see not just what's on one sheet of paper, like a one-time interview, but they're going to be able to go and see 2 years of work that he's done on video. And they're going to get such a good sense of, just like a client gets a good sense of who I am, an employer is going to get a really good sense of who he is.
Right.
It's like, way impressed with that.
And so my advice for people starting a podcast or the video is to think of content that has that long shelf life, because it might be something they created 3 years ago that all of a sudden is searchable and people find you because you didn't have to take it down.
So you mean market commentary isn't?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit today. Market commentary can be really good. It can go viral in the short term, but it can be dated a month from now, a week from now, or even tomorrow it could be out of date. So if the problem is, if some advisors are pure investment management, it's kind of, they feel like limited. That's all they have to do. That's where some basic education on investing or some like principles behind it, that stuff can still have a longer shelf life. But yeah, if you're getting into what this stock did and why it's going to perform well or not, the other thing that's an issue there is that you're on record of kind of making a prediction. Yeah, you're like, oh man, that wasn't, I tanked on that one. So it's not like Jim Cramer that can be wrong and he's doing the next thing the next day. So advisors need to be a little careful of that.
Yep, absolutely.
Go ahead. Well, my other question for you is, if there are some other people new into the industry and the financial planning side, what are some of those hurdles that maybe we should talk about to make them more successful?
Yeah. Well, I think, oh my goodness, there's so much. First of all, passing the CFP is a huge deal, but that's, everybody kind of has to do that. But it's hard to land a good job. And I don't know if you can, because I know you work with a lot of really successful companies. So what are companies looking for with their new hires? Like, what are the expectations, or what do new hires need to know?
Well, the interesting thing is that a lot of advisors, kind of being stereotypical, think of the older male, that I came up in the old wirehouse regime, and I was a salesperson, and I had to walk to school uphill in a snowstorm both ways, and like they think of their past as the way that the new people have to come into the world and be in the industry, and that's not. It's evolved a lot, and so there's a lot of best practices, and I know that we had a little side conversation about a lot of the content out there is now really for the older generation financial planner. It's not for the younger person. So hats off to you for having this podcast about how to make them more successful. So we can cover whatever you want on this podcast. But
so people get in these jobs, and your whole focus on your part of the Coach's Corner is on business growth.
Yeah,
and the business isn't growing. So I was reading a Facebook post from somebody who was a wholesaler, and he said basically that he would go around and everybody says they're in business growth mode, and he's like, maybe 5% are who say they are. When the business isn't growing, what are the red flags for you, especially from the young advisor perspective?
It's really funny. I'll go off on a tangent. We can go back to the general thing, but I just wrote an article for Byrnes. They've had me do a lot of case studies. I have to change some of the details, so I'm not giving away any client info. But we had one relationship we got in, and they were at odds. The next generation advisors and the senior owner principal, they couldn't stand each other, and things were just about to explode. And really, the older person was really, really cranky. And what happened was he expected all these sales things to happen, but they had what I call a overflow model. So he would bring in business and then drown them. Like they were just basically service associates because they didn't have time to do their own business development. So what we did with that was we recognized that is an issue. So we talked about how to improve that. We broke it down. We gave them each their own goal that they could attain. And they actually plugged into something bigger. And then they all knew their part. And the relationships, because we got them to communicate better and kind of, not to be a consultant with over-analogize things, they're all rowing in the same direction. Things were way better. So they liked to show up to work and they weren't hating each other anymore. I don't know if that answers your question, but there's a lot to that. I don't know if that one case study makes sense.
Well, and I think so much what you're saying is it's about communication, and it's about having those clear lines. And as young planners, one of my first questions when you were talking was, well, do they have to bring in a consultant? and sometimes the answer is yes. Right? But that kind of goes to this idea of managing up. And we haven't talked about that a whole lot, but I think it's a really interesting idea. So you're in this situation where you feel like you're banging your head against a wall as a young planner. How can you start having more productive conversations with the older advisors in your room?
Yeah, the communication is the secret. So a facilitator like a consultant Byrnes Consulting, but that helps because a third party can recognize stuff. But if they're people open to talking, really common things that we see is that sometimes I'll do both sides of the coin. Sometimes the person that comes in with very little experience demands the world. On the other side, we see that the same thing, the senior person demands the world, doesn't give them time to grow. Another real common one is the senior person starts to phase into retirement, and that's not really fair that everyone else is doing the work. So there's all kinds of those conflicts. A real solid business plan so everyone knows their part and is on the same page, and one that's not dictated. I love when I talk about how the younger generation should have ownership. It's not always that they have equity in the firm, but they have ownership in where it's heading and the vision. So that's why doing the business planning part together is so important.
Right. And so if your firm is not that way, if you're not in one of the fortunate firms where they really are engaging the new planners, so many times the option is just to leave. What, from your perspective, Is that the best option for people, or?
Yeah, the extreme is you leave, or you at least say that as a threat, and that creates some issues. So that's, that kind of that poker hand that you want to kind of keep those cards back until they're needed. And sometimes they're not even worth that much with, I always warn people not to sign non-competes.
Yes.
But if you have that, that power move is gone, because you're going to have to restart. But when you first start, you should say, hey, how am I going to be successful at this? And work with it together. Like, this is what I think, this is what you think, and have a plan. And then make sure they're held accountable to it. And not in a whiny way, but like, hey, this is going to benefit the firm, not just you and I. And then once you get that kind of consensus, it can work. If it's really damaged, you do kind of need a third party, whether it's someone in the firm or someone that knows you, or paying a professional. Yeah.
So one of my favorite podcast episodes is, I forget what episode it is. We'll have it in our show notes, but it's What We Wish We Knew Before We Left. And so we talk all about the non-competes, non-solicitation, like all the different forms that they have you sign at the beginning or middle, or sometimes as one of the persons at the end of your employment with them, and why that's so important, especially for new planners, knowing what you're signing and what your limitations are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the legal compliance person, so be careful with listening to me on this, but push back on that whenever you can. I think it's fair if the person is teaching you everything that they're getting you to be successful, that they have some ownership in the clients. But it's also fair if someone really works hard, that's their clients, and that there's probably some buyout potential there rather than just stealing the clients. We've seen some really bad altercations where people just battle, and then the owner is very, very strong, and they end up taking the clients, and they end up damaging the company from both sides. So if they were really, again, rowing the oars all together the same way, they would have not had those issues. People get divorced in real life, and they do as partners too. And so that sometimes it's just, really putting in the quality time up front to know them. A 1-hour interview is not enough to know if you're working with the right person forever. So the interview process for both sides should be a little bit more intensive. But you probably have heard from your other connections in the industry that it's just a constant battle. But with 0% unemployment, there's probably more opportunities for people. And the planners that are coming in this industry, there's a need for them. The industry needs more, so they do have a bit of a competitive advantage there.
Well, and it's so hard to find good people, and finding good people. I talk to these firm owners now, and we talk about their business struggles, and it's retaining talent. It's a huge issue, because if you've been at a firm for 2 or 3 years, you've built relationships with those clients. You really their systems, their processes. They've put a lot of money into you. So you leaving, they're incentivized to try to keep you to stay there.
Yeah, it's totally interesting to see how if people are smart about making these decisions, how much more successful the firms are. But the people that are unrealistic or over demanding, they tend to shoot themselves in the foot. One of the things too is as you become more valuable to the firm, you have a stronger bargaining chip. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that, how the younger planners could be more successful.
Absolutely.
I do love that you're doing a podcast. And what I would say is that we talked about how I've written a lot of articles before, but if you create this whole library of whatever the content is, you're just that much more competitive. You're that much more credible, and things become easier for you. Yeah. For me, things come out of the woodwork. I have no idea sometimes where the next client is coming. When I first started this, we just hit our 10-year anniversary. I had no idea where my next client would come from, and I was scared it wouldn't come. Now I can almost count on it to be automatic that these clients come out of nowhere, new clients that is. But that takes a lot of hard work. You got to hustle. You got to rather than watch have your DVR maxed out and you got to watch every show because the old ones are falling off. Cut half of that out and spend a night dedicating it to improving your personal brand and be a content machine.
So let's talk about that, being a content machine. Okay. So you, I think in your presentation today, said you had 350 published articles. Okay, so how do you do this? Besides just grinding it out.
Well, I mean, there is so much content. There's so many great ideas out there. What I learned, and I'll give this advice to anybody, is that I started a website and there wasn't a ton of traffic there. And I started writing some articles for that. And I realized, hey, why get a distribution of less than 1,000 people a month in the very beginning? Not luckily we're higher than that now, but why I could go write for a financial advisor magazine and have 100,000 is the distribution, and it's built in and it gives you more credibility and all that. So getting published somewhere is nice. So you just got to make yourself into an expert. We were talking on the ride here how I'm going to credit her top 40 under 40, or what's the
Investment News 40 under 40. Yeah.
And so that is great industry press, but on the retail side, you can now spin that because the press will say, wow, she's really credible. And she's got her own podcast.
Well, and I'll say, like, becoming an expert, I mean, granted, like, I chart my own path, like, God help us. But, it's not all that difficult to become an expert. I look at, so we've been really involved with the FPA, and I'll tell you, like, I'm talking with, their journal staff, and they're like, we want next gen talent. Like, where is it? Mm-hmm. Where are those upcoming experts? Who are those people we can highlight? Mm-hmm. So there was, these college students, there was a college student I was talking to, and he was getting mentored by a pretty big name in the industry. And she's like, well, why don't you just do some research and publish an article? And so he did. Like, he went to the state of Texas. He pulled up all of this information that's all available to the public. And now he's doing research, and now he's going to publish a paper and get press off of that. And it's like, wow, like, what a cool way to differentiate yourself. Mm-hmm. If there's a certain type of client you work well with, is that if there's a certain, there's people out there who are hungry for next gen talent and next gen content.
So there's a term called web mutation. So it's your reputation on the web. And a lot of people coming out of school, it actually works against them. The keg stand picture, the inappropriateness.
Use some privacy settings.
Yeah, learn how to, or tell your friends not tag you in the wrong pictures, that type of thing. But you can build that up for good. And there should be a strategy. They should teach that even in high school, so that people are preparing so they can be that much more competitive. It's no longer just a resume game. Like, it's not just that 1 or 2 page resume that gets you hired. It's this whole encompassing thing. Mm-hmm. I remember when I went to college, I got waitlisted. That was a rolling admission, and I submitted it kind of late, and I got waitlisted. And I had a guidance counselor that was actually my baseball coach, and he had me put a stack of stuff like this together, like for the podcast people. Sorry, it was a thick stack. And so what happened was, I put in everything from baseball stats to papers I wrote to charity stuff I did, and I got in. And the reason why is because I really showed that I wanted to go to school, and I had this huge effort. And that's the same thing. If people are looking to find the right position, just show that you want it. Be a little bit more hungry and prove that you're the best, or one of the best.
I was talking to an employer who had somebody come in with a completed financial plan and said, here's an example of my work.
Really?
And I'm like, wow, like, they stood out. Mm-hmm. Like, that's impressive stuff to do.
Yeah. I mean, I when I give advice for hiring managers or owners, it's not always that they know exactly what they know, but it's the eagerness, the willingness to learn, and the right attitude to it all. Because the right person you can teach up. So even that person, if that financial plan wasn't perfect, the fact that they put the extra effort to do that is so cool. It
says a lot. Yeah. And again, it's the world is changing. Like, we're not in the 1990s anymore, where it's the same resume, and it's just kind of crazy. Yeah, to think how, what's it going to be like in 10 years? We're going to have to do Instagram stories or something will be what separates people.
So, I don't know if too bad it's not live and we could be answering real questions, but some of the things that I often hear from financial planner, you want me to talk about some
absolutely.
Of that? So when you have a brand new financial planner, the struggle is they don't know where to start. And so the problem, as the RIA segment has grown so much, there's a lot of great companies out there, but they're not brand names. So the wirehouses are well known, but the wirehouses don't seem to want to be the feeder program anymore for good and bad reasons. So these young people have to go find these firms that they don't know anything about.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about today the environment of distrust for the industry, Bernie Madoffs and all the other stuff. No fault of hopefully anybody watching or listening. But that is stuff that the planners have to get over. And that's when they start to look at how to differentiate themselves, they really got to figure out how to build those relationships and how to be stronger. One futuristic piece of advice I would give you is that, the whole industry is that someday, the things that we say why advisors or planners are better is the relationship side of things. And when that is the competitive piece that will never be at risk of robo-advisors because we have that relationship. And I agree, it's so important. However, 10 years from now, when you say, hey, Alexa, how's my morning looking? Oh, the weather's great. Or you got this such meeting. Oh, by the way, your financial planning's on track and your investments are here. And here's 3 things you need to do. Like, the communication part of the relationship, that there's a lot of things that build a relationship, trust and likability and all that, but communication is a big one. That is going to be much, much more competitive. So again, going back to the advice for financial planners is, how do you be an unbelievable communicator? How do you really find the best ways to wow them? How the best ways to keep them updated and such.
And so, this idea of our competitive advantage is being human and connecting with, how do you market that?
So it's really, really hard to do. But we actually in today's presentation, we talked about a social business is something I write about. It's like a regular piece I do for financial advisors. And the reason I coined it that was because advisors are wonderful at the professional side of things, but they're not always great at showing the actual personal side of it. And so to be a little complicated or show you case studies, if you do A/B testing in your email marketing blast or whatever, do something that's work related. A/B test means you test topic A versus topic B. And, you look at a work related topic, a market update, or, something from an economist, et cetera. And then the next one could be something personal. Like someone just had a baby in the office, like you have the baby come in, or, we have a bunch of nor'easters in New England or whatever it might be. Every single time we've done that test, the personal one is off the charts. So I guarantee this, if you put a market update versus the day your baby's born and you say which one's going to get clicked on more, it won't even be close. Like the competition, your baby's going to blow that away. So that's just a learning. So if you know that one little test, and don't trust me, go test this yourself. But if you start to see that is, really something that can help your business, how do you double down on that? And how do you learn from your audience, your clients, and your prospects?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things I've learned about marketing, even in the past year, is everything's measurable. Mm-hmm. Like that's, I always felt like when we talked about marketing before, it was, throw things up against a wall and hopefully something works. Yeah. But really what you're saying is get the numbers behind it,
Yeah. Digital especially is very, very, if you do something in print, like advertising or something, have a unique 800 number or a unique landing page or something that you can digitally track it or at least through the phone. But online, there's all kinds of things. And that's where the industry is really bad. It's kind of fun for a consultant like me because I like to say I'm one notch above them. I'm always trying to keep the pace and stay that way. But it's really easy. They don't know any metrics to follow. It's not just likes on Facebook. It's engagement. It's actual click-through rates, it's conversion rates, it's how much business do you spend. And I'm really, really big on ROI. And you heard me talk about that today. Because if you're going to spend any dollar, there's many ways that you can spend dollars, but you got to make sure that you're getting that positive return on investment. And it's an opportunity lost if you're doing it on something that's not as potentially successful as something else.
Yeah. The gaming side of it.
Well, and that's nice as a consultant to prove your worth because you are able to show that they are getting, they take good advice and then they implement it and it works. And actually bad consultants would die by that because so if they're ever working with an outside marketing agency or whatever it is, have those metrics of success that plug into your bigger business plan and then make sure that the advice is working because there's some duds out there, I should say.
Just like there are dud financial planners out there.
Oh, probably, yeah. But they wouldn't be tuning into this.
Yeah, of course not.
No.
We're above average here. Oh, that's great. So I'm so used to podcasts because I can just, kind of pause and we're doing video too. So it's kind of a change.
You can tell jokes in between while you're thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, the reality with the podcast is that, you're catching the audio piece of things.
Yeah.
There are times where I would say podcasts aren't good because about 2/3 of all people are visual learners.
Yep.
So I'm encouraging her to figure out how to do this on a regular basis. You don't need me here, but to try how to capture it on a video perspective. And is Charlie going to shoot me? I'm waiting for him to say, no, we don't want to complicate things too much. But from a technology side, sometimes it's easy to do both. I've actually had people that have radio programs, so very similar to a podcast. And they we got them to video record the program. And the thing is, we have a short attention span, so you don't have to video, you don't have to put the whole show up.
Yeah.
It's really just the best 2 minutes or the best 10 minutes, or maybe it's a playlist of the best, 5 of the best 2 minutes. What's really interesting there is then, that content, people digest it however they want. So you have the podcast, you have the video, you have the et cetera, and you start to share it in all the different mediums too.
Yeah, absolutely. Repurposing content.
Yeah. I need to listen to my own advice too, because I haven't done a podcast, so I should be looking at trying how to do that too.
Yeah. Well, podcasts are fun. But I may be a little bit biased on that. Awesome. So one question that came up today, you're talking about business growth, and so there's a lot of sales cycles that go through that.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's interesting because the world is just different than it was 10 years ago with technology and social media and everything like that. In your experience, how have you seen that sales cycle for prospective clients change?
Sure. I love it. So the industry as a whole is still referral driven.
Yep.
So that part of the sales cycle is still very much the same. And it doesn't have to be, but it is. But online reputation and websites, social media, and other things play a much bigger role because we're now this research society. I've said it before that libraries, sorry, any librarians on the line, but they're on the endangered species list because we don't have to go to a library to do research. Yeah. It's so easy now. We have the cell phone. You have to hold that up for the people watching. Is that there's statistics that say that what we have is more powerful than what NASA had to put the first man on the moon. We're just tapping into it. So we can research anything. So in a referral-driven industry, people are now going online. So on this, like the sales cycle, you said they're doing all this research, and so sometimes the sales decision happens before they ever encounter a planner. Before they ever email them, phone call them, or visit their office. They've almost made a decision. But to do that, you have to have a great online presence. That's where videos and really good content is so important. And just a nice website that's mobile friendly and all the right things. One little side note there is if you don't have a mobile friendly website, I'm going to kick you through the YouTube video. I'll give you a kick in the pants, that is. You have to have one because even a referral-driven industry, if they do that research and they have to move the screen and pull and pinch, all that stuff, that they're just going to get frustrated and they'll go to get the next referral. And if they can't do that research really easily, you might lose something. Sales cycle, I keep going. Or is that?
No, that's great. Yeah, keep going.
The other part on the sales cycle is now if they've, Google calls it the 0 moment of truth, where they purchase a product or a service online basically before they ever encounter the product or service. They're when they show up, they're just kicking the tires. What happens there is that you have to start to sell to them. And how do you sell to them? People don't like to be sold to, if you're forcing why you're the best. So my advice in the sales process is get out online and demonstrate your expertise. An example might be outside the industry is a plumber might do how to replace your toilet video. I need a toilet replaced. Well, I'm not going to do it myself. Oh, that guy's an expert. I'm going to use him, even though he showed me how to do it. And that was really cool that he knew what he was doing. Same thing with financial advice and financial planning. So other things I can give you on the sales cycle is there will be leads that come from referrals or not that come and check you out, but you never know about them. It's that they're not in the right spot to make the decision, or they're not in the right spot to, they're just hesitant. picking a financial planner, it's not a snap decision.
No, and for a lot of my clients, like they're overcoming huge barriers to even doing it. So, well, I kind of like my guys, he's kind of good enough, or do I really want the help for somebody? I mean, it's almost like this huge emotional like point of saying like, I need help. And it's a huge deal for a lot of my clients to reach out to, prospective clients to reach out to me.
Yeah. So, thinking that through, like any advice for the people listening, or what do you think?
Oh, like on how to help those people?
Yeah.
Oh man, I don't know. Well, I think knowing that it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of hand-holding. So I just brought on a client, and the first thing that he told me, like after he signed up, he goes, the thing that stood out to me about you versus everybody else I talked to, he's like, you listened to me. I called, we had a 45-minute conversation, and you actually listened.
Yeah.
And it wasn't me saying, here's my process. I mean, I did talk about that at the end, but it was more of hearing about him and his wife and what are they doing and where do they want to go. It was much more focused on that listening and engaging him right where he was at. It wasn't, I feel like sometimes we get so caught up in where we want to take clients instead of meeting them where they are.
Right. If, on a side note, throw away the pitch book, because if you go in with your own agenda, you could ruin the whole conversation. And you need to be just as good of a listener, if not better listener than a speaker, I think, right?
Well, and there was a paper that came out about how to integrate like a lot of the behavior finance stuff. And there was a line in it that it just struck me so much, is that we don't know how to listen as a society today. So just having somebody walking into a planner's office and having the planner just listen can be a transformational experience. And it's like, wow, it's a sad indictment on our society, but it's also the power of listening.
Right. I 100% agree. Yeah. But before you get to meet them, some advice I would have is some things we shared in the lunch presentation today is that RAs especially do really good at getting referrals from clients. At least the clients say they give referrals, but they don't always see them. So how do you tap into those people that are coming? Tricks of the trade are pay attention to LinkedIn. If people if they put in a search in Google and they put your name in or your company name, your LinkedIn profile can show up. LinkedIn has a cool tool that shows you other profiles that are visiting. And sometimes you can backtrack. How do I know that second connection and where would they maybe have came from? I've actually had people reverse engineer why someone's checking them out because they didn't know the client was giving a referral, but they were able to figure it out. And they made that referral real, because otherwise they maybe never would have heard from them.
How do you reach out to that person without being like really creepy?
Yeah, that's great. Being online, you can definitely be creepy. So what I would say is in that case, we didn't think about it. We should have had that mutual connection. The advisor should have gone to him and then said, hey, can you introduce me? But what we did was we went off of LinkedIn. We did the regular search. And found that it was an executive and the person had a lot of over 10 million in assets. So it was a person that a planner or advisor really wanted as a client. We were able to get their email off their company website, and we were able to send, we customized 3 bullets. Like, hey, I saw that you're on my LinkedIn profile. I just want to let you know, if I can ever help you, these are my 3 specialties. Please let me know. I'd be glad to reach out to you. And so that is borderline creepy. But the person was there. He was doing that Google Zero Moment of Truth. He was doing the research, but he just wasn't ready to take the next step. So it was really cool. What happened was he said, I got a referral from such and such, and I've heard great things about you, and I would like to talk with you. So it took something that maybe never would have been a connection. So LinkedIn could be a source. Another way is when leads come to your website. We talked about freemiums today, which is a marketing lingo for a giveaway. Have something that is so enticing that when that prospect's there, they might bounce off your site. There's a thing called bounce rates when they see one page and they leave you. You don't want to do that. You want them to bounce on a lot of things, stay in the site, but you want to have them fill out some form. So what's that one thing that speaks to them as their target market should be really specific. And in a world where we do not want any more emails. I don't know. I can't keep up. I don't know if everyone tuning in.
Oh, it's bad.
Yeah. It's only going to get worse. So what would you trade your email for? What do you have to have as a prospect of a financial planner? And this is where we talked today about knowing your target market better than anyone else and tapping into those things that keep them up at night or the things that they really want financial advice for. And And lastly, I would just say is make them a little bit sensational. I've learned from doing all the articles. I've learned from the editors, like sometimes I hate the titles they come up with, but they change them on purpose because they want the clicks if they're online, or they want the readership in paper or whatever it might be. So same thing with your freemium. The example I always give is, here's advice for you for retirement, or be more sensational and say, hey, here's 5 things you have to know before you retire. Which one are you more likely to trade your email for? Like the one that creates that urgency. And so that's the second piece I would say is there are referrals coming to you that you don't know. Use LinkedIn or use your website to capture them. And there's other tricks of the trade, but those are 2 good ones.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. So speaking to young planners, what other pieces of advice would you have for them?
Oh my goodness, that's so broad-ended. I would have I talked about plugging into the overall business plan, but I would have your own personal plan of what you want to accomplish, and actually hold yourself accountable to it. And that's nice to develop. It doesn't have to be a paid consultant. You can create a mini study group of other people like you that, it's better if they're not competitors, but even if you're in the same region, sometimes you're not bumping up against each other. But if you can share great ideas and all the things you're going through, that can be really good. We had a client that they do their business plan every year. They post it, they share it with the group. So it is a little dangerous to the competitors, but they share it with the group, and then the group rips it apart. And they literally, if 6 months later they don't follow through on the business plan, they're like, "What's wrong with you? Like, why didn't you do this? This is your business plan." So that's not every study group's like that, but that can be really helpful. So build that network, whether it's free or paid, that can just make you that much better. A mentor is really good too, and you're lucky if you can find it in your own firm. But if you don't have one in the firm, go on a mission to these conferences, or just network through LinkedIn or other different ways to find someone that would be open to giving you advice. The real cool thing about mentors, and I was lucky I had some younger in my life that helped me with my marketing career, but if you go to them and say, "Hey, I really want to learn from you," people like to talk about themselves.
It's true.
And in that first meeting, I had "Oh my goodness, did any of that help me?" That guy was just talking about his whole career, blah, blah. But after that person had such a vested interest in my success because I cared about what made him successful, that he went above and beyond to help me throughout my career. And still is someone that I can talk with and bounce things off of. So a mentorship is wonderful.
And it's funny, so a lot of people, they have, they're like, well, we have the internet. Do I really need a mentor? I can see how businesses are structured, and I can learn everything that I can learn from a mentor online. And I remember, so Patrick Doherty, I talked about him on, he led the Year of Financial Planner. Now what? I'd say he's probably my biggest business influence and business mentor, in that my business is modeled so much after his. And if you put together a 500, 2,000, whatever word blog, I would have learned a lot from that, but I learned even more because I got to ask him all the questions. I got to take my situation and apply, he got to filter that. I got to see how his business has slightly changed over the years. And it's you learn so much more depth and nuances that make you so much better than just reading an article on the internet.
And the other thing too about mentors is sometimes you're paying for a mentor and you don't even realize it. If you're related to a custodian, a broker-dealer, a wirehouse, they have resources to help. And don't be afraid to call them, pick up the line. They're usually focusing for the top money makers, but the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And if those resources are there, are you making sure you're taking advantage of them? Because it's part of the deal. That's part of your service.
Well, and it goes back to what you were talking about, with how you hire people. You want the eager people. Yeah. So, if you're a wholesale, if you're at TD Ameritrade or custodian or whatever, if they see that you're eager and you're going above and beyond, it's likely that you are going to be the top producer someday. Yeah.
A big piece of advice for young people and old is don't be a know-it-all. If any person, it's so arrogant if you think, I'm not insulting anybody, but I'm just saying in general.
We won't use examples.
If you think that you know all the answers, then you're not going to be as successful. I see a really good correlation in that where they're kind of very smart people. Yeah, I say the industry as a whole is really smart. Getting your CFP, your CFA, your licenses, your whatever it is, it weeds out people that maybe don't have as much brain power. But that can actually be a weakness because when they're smart, they actually think they know all the answers. I think the most successful people are going to be the ones that are in a constant state of learning. Like they always want to be challenged because, the Polaroids went out of business because of the digital camera. Blockbusters went out of business because of other things, Netflix and such. Yeah. Our industry is going to change. And if you're not open to that and trying to learn, what we learned in college, 20 years from now, you're going to be in this industry for a long time. It's going to look really, really different.
Yep.
And you have the fun thing. You can have the podcast people come on and share all their expertise.
I learned so much, you guys.
Hopefully you guys, this is helpful and we're not wasting our podcast listeners and video listeners too. But
yeah. Well, and staying curious. That's always what I say. Is this attitude of curiosity. So it drives me, one of my pet peeves is older planners who tell younger planners that's a terrible business idea. That's never going to work. Yeah. It's like, what if instead you said, tell me more? And you approached it with a curiosity, how much more those older planners would learn and would really be helping bridge that generation gap as well. So, but younger planners can do that too. Again, it's that know-it-all. It's tell me more. What am I missing? Yeah.
And again, that willingness to learn will just take you to a lot of places that you're not going to think about before. The other thing too is in that process, be aware of not just reading what has been successful and what's been the advice in the past, but look for those things that are new that are going to be a little bit different. They're the differentiators that are going to set people apart. And so if you're trying to climb the ladder within a firm, or if you're creating your own business and you want to kind of look for a new niche or a new exciting service, there are things that are going to be developed, especially technology. I'm not going to bore people on the podcast, but Moore's Law is basically about transistors and circuits, but they're every 18 months or every 2 years, it doubles in capacity. Yeah. So for the video people, we're seeing a hockey stick ramp up of change, and it's going to blow us away. Like what's coming at us. So not just learn, but learn fast. Like it's going to come at us at a much faster pace than anyone's ever experienced in the past.
Yeah. And what if we had advisors really embraced that and said we're going to help our clients with that? Yeah. There's a lot of power in that.
So learning, listening to a podcast like this is fantastic. Reading articles, watching videos is helpful. Hopefully this video too. But attending conferences, making calls, checking out different things, always looking for kind of the brightest minds. What I would also say is, advice for new planners is it's okay to make a mistake. I mean, you don't want to mess up a client portfolio and definitely don't want to wire something without permission. Like those, I'm not talking about those types of mistakes. I'm talking about trying some new things. If you don't ever try anything new, you're not going to go to that. What's that saying? Like you can't find a new ocean if you don't lose sight of the shore. So you do have to take some chances, and that's tough as a younger person. That if it's being dictated on you what the service model is or what you need to do every day you come into the office. You want to find some wiggle room there to do some experimentation.
Yep. Ask a client a question you've never asked before.
What? Do you have a good example?
Well, no, I'm just thinking, we talk a lot about life planning and some of those things out there. Open that door, just, ask a client. I remember my personal story. I asked for 6 months. I asked clients, what was helpful in this meeting to you? And it completely changed the way I do business. Yeah. And, just open that door for that feedback that, that's just one way to kind of do what you're saying. I
love that because I have something similar. I ask, was this meeting helpful? Yeah. But I think that's even better because then you get the granular thing that they really liked from the meeting, right?
Yeah. And everything that I thought was helpful was not helpful.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, I thought, I'm doing these great reports. And clients were like, no. And so it completely flipped my meetings. Yeah. But my clients taught it to me. That's what's so cool about it. Yeah.
So I'll give you an example of learning something that is new that didn't last. It wasn't around 20 years ago. So if you're listening to the experts that are still talking about the 20-year-old business model, they're going to miss things like this. Yep. One of them is doing research on your clients. I'm not going to bore I went into it too long today, but social media, connect with your clients and find out what's going on in their lives. If this didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, do the 5-minute research before you meet with them and find out what's going on in their lives. And I give the analogy because this was a real case where somebody saw that their client's grandkid hit a home run, and they talked about that in the client meeting, and that whole meeting was a home run. That's the kind of stuff that what do the client care about, or why do they want to work with you? Is because they like you and that you showed you cared. wow, like something that simple. It's humans want to work with humans. Like how to use technology to better that.
Yeah.
So client research online through social media. A lot of people are afraid to connect with their clients. Again, it's the person that's doing the kickstand, or a real serious one is some advisors have done really well and they go on trips all the time. They don't want everyone to see that they're asleep at the switch or away from the switch. Just be cautious. Don't post everything.
Right.
Wealthy people go on trips too. They'll connect with that, but just don't do it too much. But it works both ways. You don't just do the research on them. They're going to want to know you. One funny example, and I don't know how we're doing on time, but was someone that actually their kids come in the business and they become interns, and a lot of times they push their social media agenda, and the older generation not in love with it. But some success stories come out of that. And one was a little old lady of a client. And so the advisor got onto Facebook and connected with all his clients that were using it. And this lady was 15 years older than this person. So I think he was about 58. So you can imagine her age. She came in the next meeting and said, this exact quote said, I feel like I finally know you. And they had a relationship over 10 years. And so he like just in that one little phrase, like, wow, that is how important Facebook is to this whole client relationship thing that I have going here. It's not going to be that case with every client, but with that one person, wow, like how significant was that?
Yeah. Oh, that's great stuff. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
It's over.
Mike.
No,
I know. We could talk for hours, I think.
It went too fast. Just to wrap up on the video part, we'll promote somewhere Hannah's podcast, and we'll get you that information on the YouTube channel. I'll definitely put it down in the description. So click down and check that. Do you want to just share it online one more time? Yeah, absolutely. To where you can find the podcast. So go to iTunes, Stitcher, your favorite podcast player. You can just search and find it. You're a Financial Planner Now What? Or you can go fpaactivate.org. And if you're listening to the podcast and you want to watch the video, because it was so great, you want to see it and hear it. Byrnes Consulting is spelled, Byrnes is Byrnes. If you go into YouTube and search Byrnes Consulting, it'll come up. And then hopefully that'll be the top video there. Yeah. But we'll get that, and we'll cross-promote this, and maybe we'll get two audiences checking it out. And hopefully the FPA will promote it too. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks, Mike. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Bye, guys. Bye, everyone. Need any help with your business? Reach out to Byrnes Consulting at byrnesconsulting.com.
We would love for you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like this video. Also, please feel free to share your comments, tips, or questions below.